Hi everyone, let's work through problem 19-2A, which demonstrates a job costing scenario. In this problem, we have Taibe's computer system, and we have a trial balance as of December 31st, 2005. The company's manager knows that something is wrong with the trial balance because it doesn't have any balance in it doesn't have any balance in goods in process inventory, but it does show balances in factory payroll and factory overhead accounts, and we're given the trial balance, which you see in front of you. Now, he searches through various files and he finds 6 source documents that need to be processed to bring the accounting records up to date. He's got a material requisition 21-3010. He's got 2 others that you can see right here where I'm moving the mouse. The first one for $4,600 direct materials to job 402. The second one, $7,600 direct materials to job 404. He has another materials requisition which says $2,100 of indirect materials. And he has 3 labor time tickets, 2 going to jobs 402, 404, and 1 for indirect labor. Then we know that jobs 402 and 404 are the only units in process at the year end, and the predetermined overhead rate is using 200% of direct labor cost. Okay, let's take a look at the requirement, and I'll slide up so you can read it. And we'll handle requirement 1. Use the information on these 6 sources of documents to prepare the journal entries to assign the following costs. And A is the direct material cost to cost in goods inventory. Okay, so we have direct material cost of $4,600 for job 402, $7,600 for 404, and let's tackle 1A first. I'll do that on another tab, so I'm going to switch the screen now. Okay, so on December 31st, right, you could label that, you could format it any way you want. We know we have to record the requisition of direct materials, so we will debit goods in process inventory, and we will need to credit raw materials inventory. Okay, I will indent that a little bit, and we need to do that in the amounts of the $4,600, which was job 402. Let me move the pencil over so you can see it. And there was $7,600 for job 404. Okay? So that's how we would record that in the accounts. And there's your debit and there's your credit. Okay, now let's move back and do B. B says the direct labor cost to goods in process inventory. We need to journalize that as well. The direct labor costs are $5,000 and $8,000. So why don't I copy this whole entry down, and then we'll change it as we need to. Okay, again, it would goods in process, only this time the credit wouldn't be to raw materials inventory. It would be to the factory payroll account, because that's the source of where it's coming from now. And that amount then is going to be equal to the $5,000 for job 402 and the $8,000 for job 404. Okay? Let's take a look at C now. C said we had overhead costs to the goods in process inventory, and we apply it at, later on we may need to know that predetermined rate is 200%. Okay? Let's copy that entry and keep moving. So this one really is A, this one is B. I'll just put it right on top. And so for C now, we need to debit goods in process inventory, but the credit, instead of to factory payroll, would be to factory overhead. And keep in mind there might be more than one factory overhead account, but you may do the offset just in a control account. So there might have been, let's say, a factory overhead utilities, right? There might have been another one called factory overhead indirect materials. Could be a bunch of things. Okay? But in this case, we would credit to the control account, so I'll just credit to factory overhead in total. And the dollar amounts for jobs 402 and 404 would go in at 200% of the direct material cost. So we would say equal the direct material cost, which we'll get from here, times 200%. So actually we need that 200% right now because we would only assign factory overhead into goods in process at that predetermined rate, because that's the way you would do it in a job costing system, and they've given that amount in our problem. Okay, so that would be 26,000. Let's give D a try. Okay, on D, we're asked to take the indirect material cost to the factory overhead account. Let's copy from above. Now, on D, we would debit factory overhead and credit raw materials inventory. This is how the text approaches this problem. And we would make it for the amount equal to the cost of indirect materials to actual factory overhead. Okay? And in that problem it was $2,100, which was that line right there. And the credit then would go to raw materials inventory. Now, I want to make one change. In my experience, there is a complete segregation between direct materials and indirect materials. And in the systems I've worked with, we would have an account for raw materials to cover for direct materials, and it would either be called raw materials or direct materials, but indirect materials would go in a supplies account. It might be called indirect materials, it might be called supplies inventory. That's just what I've seen. Now, this first account I put down where my cell is highlighting is the way our authors approached it, and that is the way they approach it, and that's the way you should approach it for quizzes and exams in case it comes up. Okay. By the way, we should be recording what the purpose of these were on every entry. So let me go ahead and put those in now. This one was to add the cost of indirect materials to actual factory overhead. Okay? And we'll indent this. Okay? So that it's clear that that's a description. On C, the entry was to allocate overhead really to jobs 402 and 404, right, at 200% of direct labor. Alright, I'll just use some abbreviations there, and we'll format it the same way here, and that should slide right over. Okay, let me insert a line here. And we'll format that here, and then I'll type and it'll be spaced in the right place. Okay, the B transaction was to record the direct labor costs for jobs 402 and 404. Okay, again I will insert, and in here the first one was to record the direct materials costs for jobs 402 and 404. Okay, so this exercise is walking you through the exercise, the various transactions you need to make. Let's do E. Again, I'll copy from above, just to start with a shell. We can work from it. And what do they want on E? Let's take a look. On E, they ask us to use the information on the source documents and record the entries for indirect labor cost to factory overhead. Okay, so again we need to debit the factory overhead, but since it's indirect labor, it would come from the factory payroll account. Rather than typing it, I'll just reference a cell above. Okay, and this amount was $3,000. Okay, and then again we want to indicate why we made that. Proper form for a journal entry was you would indicate why the entry is made indented below the last credit. To add cost of indirect labor to actual factory overhead. Okay, and that